In a series of strikes, the Ukrainians cause massive damage in the Russian rear, while the fighting along the front line in Kursk is kind of stalling for the moment, and the Russians keep advancing in Donetsk. We'll talk about this as well as about the other developments along the front line, political things, international aid, troop generation, etc. in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are saying they struck an S-300 battery in Novoshakhtinsk in Rostov. I have no confirmation of this. I have no proof that the damage was done, but this is the claim from their side. Again, though, they struck an airfield with drones here in the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians struck them with drones in the Russian rear. The Ukrainians say they destroyed a glide bomb depot, and the visual evidence shows us that significant damage was done. As we can see, even secondary explosions, as you can see here, are still happening in the background. So we know that these strikes have been successful and they did significant damage, as you can see with the smoke here. The fire that spread is visible here. You see that a majority of what was around the airfield was destroyed and burned in this attack. And the interesting part is too, we have here visual evidence that very likely at least one plane was destroyed in this attack. It's unclear as of now whether it was Sukhoi 24 or a Sukhoi 34. We have pictures from inside because some Russian apparently wanted to take some pictures and post it on social media. So it shows us that while this was the first event where where shelters have been attacked, they are just made of sheet metal and not able to protect them. And this here clearly shows us that the Ukrainians used fragmentation warheads in their attack, obviously perfectly suited to strike against unarmored planes. Here, apparently with ball bearings filled with this. This is supposed to be one of them. We have Fighter Bomber talking about it. This is the Russian mill blogger that is focusing on air topic. He's saying that every plane that was airworthy was flying away, but they had to leave a lot of them behind that were not capable of flying. The reason for that he identifies as too few spare parts, too few air engines, etc. So logistics still a massive problem even in the Russian rear. Also, the shelters are not protecting from not even from splinters, and the hangars were placed far too close to each other, and one of the hangars was filled with ammunition because the soldiers like to store it in dry place and not walk around far. So basically they had right next to the planes, they had one of these shelters filled with glide bombs to have it easier to transport it around, and the Ukrainians were managing to hit it. But that wasn't all, because the Ukrainians also struck a ferry in Kafkas on the Azov Sea. Here, the ferry has sunk, as the Russians are confirming in this here. The national news agency TASS is confirming that the ferry was sunk. And we have here claims that those ferries were used to transport fuel. The reason for that is that in the initial attack on the Crimean Bridge, there was a train next to the road bridge, and that train was filled with fuel, and the fire burned and damaged the bridge and the tracks and caused significant damage. Since then, not only is, according to this, the rail capacity not at full back to full strength because of damages, but the other thing is that obviously this causes fear that a lucky hit by the Ukrainians might once again cause damage to the bridge and destroy it. So the Russians have decided to move fuel with their railroad ferries over the Kerch Strait instead of with the bridge, which is operational at this point. But by now the ferries are all taken out. One is seriously damaged and in repair, and the other two are being sunk. So here they are recommending locals to better stock up because there might not be fuel coming for quite a while. Then we have news from Proletarsk. This also shows the satellite picture of where the ferry was hit, and you can see the massive difference in damage in the towards the ferry harbor. And in Proletarsk, there's still fire happening. Proletarsk is the fuel storage that was attacked like a week ago, and you see that several tanks are damaged and others are still burning. And an analysis here, according to the pictures, showed that while the status of 33 of the tanks is unknown, 25 they confirmed as being fine, and 15 are destroyed and 3 partially destroyed in the pictures that we see here, according to the damages that are visible on pictures. Then we have a report of, you see another serious explosion happening here. This was a fuel dump in a fuel storage facility in Voronezh, and here the Ukrainians supposedly used a new drone or a cruise missile by the name of Palyanutsa, something like this. This drone, the design is still unclear. Now those are wreckage pieces that have been found in the past. I see them being spread around now, but this is clearly snow, so this must be an older variation. This is another candidate that this might be one of the planes, but as of now I cannot confirm which kind it was. This is H.I. Sutton's Covert Shores, who made the graphics here of the potential drone that was used. I guess at some point we can call it a cruise missile, as the communication with the ground will be fairly limited once it started, but this is now jet powered, so significantly faster and thus better to evade Russian air defense, and the Ukrainians have developed it. The Ukrainian president said that this was now used against the fuel, the ammunition storage. According to the Ukrainians, 5,000 tons of ammunition was stored there and now destroyed. Obviously, again, no real way for us to confirm this, except that we see massive explosions. Then good news for Ukrainian soldiers. 115 of them were exchanged in an exchange of prisoners of war. Among those 115 Ukrainians were 82 from Mariupol. 50 of those were fighting in Azovstal, so among the last defenders, and 6 were National Guard soldiers that were defending Chernobyl. So those that were taken in the first 48 hours, they were taken as of prisoners and of the war, or of the second phase of the war. They were still prisoners of war until now, and now it was possible to exchange them. The Russians in return received 115 conscripts, so it was an exchange one by one, not in a higher ratio as was hoped for, but at least 115 of the Ukrainians were able to return home after more than 2 years. Let's go to the developments along the front line now. The Russians are starting to build fortifications in Kursk. We have visual evidence of this here now. Or first, let's start with the maps. Here we have Petrenko. I do not think that he did an update. I think those two were from yesterday as well. And here we have Riba, also not showing significant changes. Basically, the two developments from both sides. The front line has to be somewhat stabilized and there is no confirmation of significant change. We have here Tatarigami, who is showing us satellite pictures of the new trench systems. The Russians are building right south of the nuclear power plant, so that should be more or less along this area here, where the Russians are now building fortifications to be prepared to stop the Ukrainians in the near future. This was here. Then we have the claims by the Russian that they managed to, Riba here actually. Riba is claiming that they managed to defeat the Ukrainians and probably took back the village of Borki, according to some reports. So even they do not fully confirm it. As of now, I have not seen any visual evidence. I have seen in pro-Ukrainian map reports, though, that talk about serious Ukrainian serious Russian attacks that mostly were defeated. And that was the wording, mostly. This would indicate that the Russians in some place of the front line were able to slightly advance. I do not see, I wasn't able to fully identify where this was supposed to be, but as of now, I have no further information how far the Russians have advanced. It seems to be minor, and as you saw, even Riba is still doubtful whether Borki has fallen to the Russians again or not. But we see that the Russians are doing counterattacks and are doing bigger counterattacks, but they are still mostly failing. The Russians themselves, here for instance, it was Wargonzo, the Russian mill blogger, they are talking about additional Ukrainian attacks, massive attacks in numbers, so a lot of individual attacks, but they claim all of them were defeated and the Ukrainians suffered high losses. I have not really seen visual evidence of anything there, but basically both sides agree that the other side does serious attacks and a bigger number of attacks, and the amount of territory that might have changed hands is at most very limited or not at all, or no territory has changed at all. Let's switch to the northern front line in Kharkiv, which we have here. The Russians were reporting mechanized attacks towards Liboke. I've seen visual evidence of the Ukrainians losing some equipment along this route here, but the northernmost I have seen of the Ukrainians reaching was this. So I cannot see that any territory here has changed. We have, though, the claim, and this is fairly interesting, that the Ukrainians still, that there are still Russians cut off in Vovchansk. Now, this is the Ukrainians claiming it, that they are still being cut off. The plant is blocked. Logistics there is carried out extensively with the use of UAVs. So according to the Ukrainians, there are still Russians in here, and they are cut off, but they are being kept supplies. They should be cut off, what, by 1.5 months now? Maybe 2 months? So we have the Ukrainian claims. I am not sure how close this is to the truth. From the Russians, I have not seen any. We know that the Russians were cut off in between. That much is for certain. And when it came to geolocations, we had Russians in here, we had Ukrainians in here and here. So it's possible that they are mostly cut off. But the interesting part is that according to the Ukrainians, they are actually still there. They are still holding out at that point, which would be, as said, at least 1.5 months to 2 months. I guess we can only keep an eye on it and see how it develops. But overall, the number in there can't be massive, probably less than 40 or something like this, seeing the size of the usual groups that operate in Ukraine. This should not be, so even if this should not be a massive number, so even if the Ukrainians manage to destroy the unit there, this will be a tactical victory, but not a mass surrender or something like this. Then we go to the Eastern Front, and here we have the reports of a Ukrainian counterattack that was successful. The 3rd Assault Brigade has taken this territory here at Novovodiane. They are claiming that they managed to destroy significant Russian forces while attacking with an inferiority of 1 to 2 to 5. I think I've seen geolocations that more or less confirm it. So it seems to actually be the truth that the Ukrainians retook this whole area here with the 3rd Assault Brigade, which has turned out to be one of their elite formations. You remember that they were the ones being called in, for instance, to keep the lines open to Avdiivka. Now they are apparently up there and had some success. Let's switch to the area south of the Seversky Donetsk, because I have nothing more in the north. I do not have any additional Russian advances or Ukrainian advances. Here in Bilohorivka, we have the first geolocation from this area. The Russians have reached until here. This should be here. So they were in the gray zone. That doesn't mean they managed to take additional ground. We know that the Russians keep pushing here, but I do not see any change in territory in this direction. Other than that, nothing from the southern area, but we have something from Chasiv Yar here. And here the Russians managed to cross the canal again, or they were still there. I think they were pushed out, as we had recently seen Ukrainians here, which might be an indication. But now we have the Russians geolocated in here again. The sign up here shows us that they are back in the built-up areas west of the canal in Chasiv Yar. Further south, the Russians have advanced in Novorodivka. This is in this here. No, my mistake. I was too fast. I jumped the line. First, we have something at Klishivka, and here the change is also worth mentioning. Russians are identified here. This is here. So somehow the Russians managed to reach this point. What that means, where the front line is right now, I can't say. They might have advanced in this direction. They might have come over here. We know that the Russians in the past were at this point. We know they were here and roughly here. And I think they were at that point. So it's probably likely that they marched up here and reached this position, which would likely mean that the Ukrainian presence in this area is either weak or withdrawn. So they seem to be able to clear the area here from the Ukrainians. At least that's the indication that they are in the process of doing this. This is the first advance in this area here for quite some time, so we'll have to keep an eye on it in the future. But further down, further south in the Toretsk region, we have an advance by the Russians in Drushba here. They have reached further to the northwest. This should be roughly here. So they have advanced in this direction, and this is more important or a significant change, they have reached the southern part of Toretsk where they have not been yet. And this is a significant change as we are now talking about the Russians here. The map here isn't quite accurate. We had the Russians here and here recently. So this, again, does not allow us to know whether they walked through here or whether they walked through this. But as of now, we know the Ukrainians have been pushed back at this point here. They have clashes in the southern parts of Toretsk after the Russians having reached the eastern part, where they also gained some additional ground over the last few days. They managed to take the high rises here that have so far still been a gray zone. Now they are under Russian control here in this direction as well. And the tone here continues. The Russians keep advancing in the Avdiivka-Toretsk area. They keep advancing here. The Russians have now taken Ptuchne. Ptuchne is down here. We have a geolocation of this as well. Raising the flag here. They are now west of Orlivka as well. This is not really a significant change. They've just been spotted here in the tree line, but they have taken this here as well. They also are in Novorodivka. This is worse because now they are inside of the built-up area in Novorodivka. The Ukrainians no longer have the advantage of the Russians being out in the open. The Russians managed to gain a foothold in the town itself. And they are now in Karlivka as well. This is further south here. We had a geolocation of them in this area. Let me quickly see here. They have now reached, here you see it, roughly the center of this, so roughly here. We have the Russians advancing in this area as well. So overall, the pressure in the rough Pokrovsk area is continuously high. This was almost the last change in territory. We have something southwest of Krasnohorivka, a geolocation not really too important in the overall picture. They have been attacked here in the open to the west of it. This should be here. Not a big surprise there. When we go to the overall situation, the Ukrainians have slowed down in Kursk. We see them still attacking. They are probably focusing on isolating the Glushkovo region here, the area south of it, which should still be in Ukrainian hands in the near future after them having taken out the bridges. I do not see what would fundamentally change and what should be possible to stop them at this, but we'll have to see overall. But other than that, the front line for now seems to slowly stabilize until at least the Ukrainians achieve another success. The exploitation phase of their advance here seems to be slowly coming to an end. In the Kharkiv area, we have the Ukrainians confirming again that fewer glide bombs are being used by the Russians. Now, though, there is a change as we have the Ukrainians saying that the Russians actually used that the Ukrainians actually used, I'm sorry, that the Russians actually used Shahid against front positions. This is this here. I made a mistake. Shahid, in theory, was supposed to be loitering munition that is able to circle around the battlefield and then crash into something. The Russians have more or less only used it strategically against targets in the far rear of the Ukrainians. But now suddenly in Kharkiv, they are being used to strike front positions. According to the Ukrainians, the majority didn't hit or was shot down. But it shows us that suddenly the Russians are using Shahid there. This would be another indication of the fewer usage of glide bombs here that is being reported. This is one thing where we see a significant change in the north and an improvement of the situation in Kharkiv, as the Russians clearly prioritize glide bombs towards the Kursk region and Sumy region. Then we have the news that while the Russians have withdrawn from the area here, as you can see, the occupiers transfer additional reserves to the Kharkiv direction. He continues to shuffle a deck of cards he currently has, but at the same time, there are still quite a lot of forces, it means, that remain in the Kharkiv direction on part of the enemy. While the Russians are withdrawing some units from Kharkiv, they haven't been weakened to a degree that would give the Ukrainians the edge in the overall situation there. At the same time, the situation in the Pokrovsk area is problematic. We have AP here in an article, and I'm going to summarize it for you. They're talking about the reduction in recruit quality, in the quality of recruits. We talked in the past that the Ukrainians have reduced the training time to 6 weeks. This is by far inadequate by anything of my experience. I had my basic training for just 2 months and then an additional training for another 2 weeks, and I didn't feel like, especially in retrospect, I do not think that I was adequately trained for a high-intensity combat that the Ukrainians are facing with this, after having been 2.5 months of training in this in a NATO unit. So they say the quality of the recruits has seriously diminished. A lot of them, or some of them at least, don't want to shoot the Russians even if they see them. Others lack basic training, including how to move in the terrain, how to use their weapons, how to clean their weapons. They have to plan, one is complaining, they have to plan operations with soldiers that can't shoot and that have no idea, no understanding of topography. Others have no trust in their superiors and retreat by themselves. And a quote from this is, "The main problem is the survival instinct of newcomers. Before, people could stand until the last moment and hold the position. Now, even when there is light shelling of firing positions, they are retreating," said a soldier with the 110th Brigade. New recruits are thus fleeing fairly early, and the new men do not have enough practice assembling and shooting their rifles, he said. They also have not learned how to coordinate combat tasks in small group or to use even simple tactics, he added, is among the critic points. Others say, no, the training is adequate, but at least from my experience, I can say that 6 weeks is highly likely not sufficient, even if you cut out every nonsense. Like, we had to learn probably for 4 days how to march properly. I'm pretty sure you can cut that out in a time of war. You can cut out how to properly make your bed, how to properly stuff your shelves, or things like this that are being taught in the German army. I'm pretty sure you can cut this out, but that this provides them with adequate training seems fairly unlikely from my experience. And then again, we come obviously to the reason for that. That was that the delay in the recruitment by the Ukrainians, where the Ukrainian government decided not to go through with the mobilization that was demanded, or that was asked for, by the then commander-in-chief Salushny. This is still having its effect as of today, and according to them, the new soldiers that are being sent to the Eastern Front are, to paraphrase it, in mostly garbage. Then we have The Economist saying something problematic, especially in connection with the two of us. Ukraine's surprise mini invasion of Russia provokes mixed feeling. Dublin, that's the nom de guerre of one of the fighters, says early successes lifted morale, but it didn't last. But it didn't last. The hope that Russia might respond by moving troops from Pokrovsk has been supplanted by the realization that it has not. Ukrainian security sources confirm that while Russia has moved troops from other sections of the Eastern Front line, it reinforced around Pokrovsk. So we talked about it in the past, especially in regards to the Kursk direction, that the Russians are withdrawing units from various parts of the front line, but that they have not weakened their front to a degree that would open up significant opportunities to the Ukrainians. I told you that the spokesperson for the Tavrisk region here in the south said they withdrew 1,000 to 2,000 soldiers out of 75 to 90,000. You can see that's at most 5% that has been withdrawn, and according to the Ukrainians, according to the Economist, the Russians are even reinforcing here because they obviously see an opportunity where they can exploit Ukrainian weakness as of this moment, a weakness also being caused by elite units currently fighting in Kursk, whereas the soldiers fighting here, the units fighting here, are understrength or staffed with low quality soldiers. Then we have the Ukrainians giving us indication how the Russians want to solve their current manpower needs, because the fact that they are stronger does not mean they don't have problems of their own. We shouldn't forget this. And this is the Ukrainians claiming that according to data they received, the Russians try to send conscripts to the Crimean Peninsula to then relieve units that are on the Crimean Peninsula to then send them to Kursk. This is probably in connection to the, 56th VDV brigade. No, it was the regiment. I can't remember. What I mentioned yesterday in the video, that was also coming from this region. This might be in a connection to this, but we see that the Russians have to shuffle around to make sure they don't just send conscripts there, but can send contractniki towards the most of the fighting. But while those are bad news, at least we have something where we could give a good interpretation, because the Ukrainian president Zelensky has promoted Syrskyi to a full general, to a 4-star general. Now, would you promote somebody who really destroys your defense and does everything bad? Maybe, I guess, but it's less likely. It seems more that Zelensky, if he promotes him now, is confident that the plan Syrskyi did is working and that his results are being delivered. We talked about it in the past. The situation towards Pokrovsk is critical. There's no sugarcoating it. It's pointless to argue around. But in the overall picture, it's still just here, and this is all of Ukraine. And it can be absolutely a part of war where you accept that you lose some area, where you accept a temporary weakness in a certain area to be able to take the initiative in another one. Shuffling around your troops to create a local superiority is one of the most basic elements of war, one of the most ancient tactics, and it would make perfect sense that it's being used here. And I guess Syrskyi being promoted does not point towards the government being massively unhappy with the results he's delivering, despite the weakness in the east. So there is probably a bigger plan that is currently going to plan. Otherwise, I would not see the promotion, unless, of course, this is some 3D, 4D psychological game that is supposed to give us the impression. In troop generation, we have an estimate by the British Ministry of Defense that the Russians by now had 70,000 losses in the last 2 months. This would be significantly higher than the Russian fresh recruitments, indicating an overall decline in Russian troop strength over the last 2 months. Then we have the Russians learning from the Ukrainians once again. They are now starting to convert Yak-52 trainer planes to basically drone fighters. To hunt down drones, they get new optics, they get new sensors, and apparently, from what I understand, the second person behind the pilot is going to start shooting down drones from that plane. We've seen Ukraine do that over Odessa. Now the Russians are doing it as well. And according to AP, this is from this article here as well, according to it, the Ukrainians are currently calling up tens of thousands every month. So this is a confirmation that while I just talked about the low troop quality, the numbers at least are getting higher and the numbers are getting bigger. And obviously every soldier not along the front line can still be trained within his own unit and thus increase in quality. The fact that the frontline units, it's simply a decision that was made to take better units out and fill the gaps with lower quality to have the better units for another mission that we see now in Kursk. This doesn't mean a total collapse by the Ukrainians is ahead. Their troop strength should be growing by every month right now, and the quality can be worked on in a later point. And then we have an interesting article that is probably not too pleasing to a fair number of my viewers. According to Politico, in an article about the usage of long-range weapons in Russia, which is a topic that is being discussed for probably a year and a half already, that the US ban the usage of their long-range weaponry, or technically it's probably at most medium range, even short range, but that's a different discussion. So that ATACMS, for instance, and HIMARS haven't been used against Russian targets. HIMARS are not now the GMLRS. That's also a simplification that wasn't correct. ATACMS and can be fired from the HIMARS. But I meant the GMLRS missiles, the fairly shorter range ones, are now allowed to be shot into Russia, whereas ATACMS are not. And it seems the US are also stopping France and Great Britain to allow Ukraine to use the Storm Shadow and Scalp inside of Russia. This is being discussed, and part of it is in this political article is saying officials in certain corners of the administration have told the Ukrainians that the US will eventually want to reset relations with Moscow, and lifting the restrictions could upend these efforts. So if the US allow Ukraine to use ATACMS against Russian airfield, it could upend resetting the relationships with Moscow and lifting the sanctions. All of this shows us that the government in Washington D.C. right now is not intending to allow Ukraine to win the war. We talked about it in the past. They want to keep Ukraine in the fight, but they have no interest. And at the same time, we need to simply acknowledge that if Ukraine cannot win this war, then Russia will come out as a victor in a war of conquest. And at the same time, the US want to allow Russia to become a victor in a war of conquest, while already thinking about resetting relationships with a nation that just did a successful war of conquest. I'll leave it at this. Make of it what you want in this regard. Not just good news for Russia, though. Here, Wirtschaftswoche, which is a German economic paper, says that the Mongolians don't seem to be interested anymore in building Power of Siberia 2, the gas pipeline. This was important to connect basically the Western gas network with China. This is necessary because while oil can be easily shipped around, and thus the oil from the pipelines leading towards the west that was meant for Europe can be sold to China and India, gas is not that easy to be transported. It's best transported with pipelines, and the pipelines from Russia's central and western fields are all pointing towards Europe, which tries to no longer buy from them. So they would need a pipeline towards the east to be able to sell to China, and that pipeline doesn't exist yet. And now a partner in the production, Mongolia, which obviously covers a long part of the joint border between Russia and China, does not seem to be interested in continuing it anymore. And finally, we have international aid. The US have promised another aid package at a volume of 125 million US dollars. Counter unmanned aerial system is included, HIMARS ammunition, 155 and 105 ammunition, small arms ammunition, anti-tank weaponry, and mine clearing equipment. But that was it from me for today. If you like the situation report, despite at least the parts that weren't that positive, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the political decisions that are being made and about the military ones? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Help me reach my goal of 100,000. We are getting fairly close, and you can be a part of it. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like the way I do it and want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.